it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker. And just before I do the formal introduction, really quickly, I'm sitting at the help desk downstairs one day, and this person who I've never met before comes walking up and says, "Hey, would you like to have genuine moon rocks on the 50th anniversary of the Eagle landing?" And I'm like, "Sure." And he said, "No, really, seriously, it's legit. You can look me up on the NASA website." So I did, and we hosted that event and made everybody in the state jealous. And it was just a really great event for Rutland. We had over 500 kids come through this room on the actual Saturday of the event. It was set up downstairs, and Tom had to be in person when the moon rocks were available. So essentially, he stood either downstairs or in this room for 6 days straight, so that local kids could do that. So I've been a huge fan ever since. I really have. Tom Estill is a board member of the American Chestnut Tree Foundation's Vermont and New Hampshire chapters. He grew up in New Mexico and received his bachelor's degree in biology in 1975 and his master's degree in environmental science education in 1990. Tom's been involved in formal and informal education for the last 48 years, serving as a classroom science teacher in California, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maryland. Adjunct Environmental Science Education Professor at Plymouth State College, Vermont State Naturalist and Aerospace Education Specialist for NASA's Goddard Spaceflight Center. And he's been planting American chestnut trees in New England since 2014 and currently manages a 60 American chestnut tree germplasm conservation orchard. Did I get that right? All right. So with that, please welcome Tom Estill.
Thank you, Randall. Thank you very much. And I'd like to also thank the Vermont Humanities for supporting this program and so many of the wonderful programs that they have throughout the year. So I'm Tom Estill, and like Randall said, I'm a member of I'm the board of directors of the Vermont, New Hampshire chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation. I've been involved with chestnuts now since 2007. So why? What happened in 2007? Now, I do have a PowerPoint presentation, but throughout this presentation, I'm going to tell you stories, because I like stories, and it really adds to the presentation. And these stories I think you're really going to enjoy hearing about. So what happened in 2006 is this. At that time, I had the privilege of working for the space agency at Goddard Spaceflight Center in their education department. And on the weekends, I would have Saturday and Sundays off usually. I would go walking usually around my apartment along the Patuxent River, observing the birds and the wildlife, something I've done all my life. And I heard about this place called Patuxent National Wildlife Refuge that had volunteer opportunities. So I visited there one day and told them about my background, and they said, "Well, Tom, we think you'd be perfect for the electric train that goes around the wildlife refuge and tells people about all the wonderful things that are happening." So on the first day I did that, my mentor, he's the driver, he's pointing out all these things that I'm supposed to talk about. And as we're returning back to the visitor center, there's a fenced-in area with some trees growing in it. And I asked him, I said, "Well, what's going on with those trees?" Because he didn't mention it. He said, "Oh, it's a little research plot that the American Chestnut Foundation is trying to grow some blight-resistant trees." I said, "Chestnut trees, really? I thought they were pretty much gone." He said, No, they're still surviving. The trees may get infected, but the sprouts will come from the roots, and they'll grow up again and get infected, and repeat that over and over and over again." I thought, wow, that's pretty neat. And that interest stayed with me. When my program ended at Goddard Spaceflight Center in 2012, I had to work a few more years before I retired. And I had spent a couple of years here in Rutland before I moved out west. And I said, well, let me see what I can find in Rutland. That's halfway between my son, New York, and my daughter in Vermont. It'd be a perfect spot, and I know something about Rutland, so let me see what they have. And there were 2 job openings 2012 for me. One was to run the men's department at J.C. Penney's. And then the other one was a science teaching job at Christ the King School. So I heard about the one at J.C. Penney's first, and they offered me the job. And I thought, well, yeah, just give me a day to think about it. And that within that day, the science job came up, and the principal called me and said, Tom, we'd love to have you. So I took the science job. From there, my first year teaching at Christ the King School, the 8th graders have to have a big community service project. So I thought about, well, why don't we start growing American chestnut trees? So I had to find a spot to do that. And actually, I learned about Pine Hill Park and started growing, planting the American chestnuts up at Pine Hill Park, which we've been doing now since 2014. And at this point, we're at 50 trees up there in 5 different spots. If you ever visit Pine Hill Park and you see little red flags sticking out of the ground, that red flag is right next to an American chestnut tree. So the kids have been taking care of those trees for a number of years now. And I'll go tell you a little bit more about that as we get into the program. But anyways, that's where my interest in the American chestnut tree started. Now, as far as being a member of the foundation, when I first came out here to Vermont and I said, well, let's grow chestnut trees at Pine Hill Park, I had to get those chestnut trees from someplace. And I actually went all over the country trying to find landscaping places that would sell chestnut seedlings, and I found a few. One in Georgia, so there's Georgia chestnut trees growing in Pine Hill Park. I found one in Ohio, so we have Ohio trees growing in Pine Hill Park. Found one in Wisconsin, so they're growing there. Maryland, and then someone told me, well, Tom, you can get the trees to the foundation, the American Chestnut Tree Foundation. So, wow, I didn't even know that it existed. So I contacted the foundation and said, yes, you can get chestnuts from us. And I thought, wow, that's great. I'll have the kids grow the chestnut tree. And how do I do that? Well, you send us $336, and we'll give you 10 nuts. And I said to myself, and this is true, I said, what a racket this is. These guys, what a ripoff. What are they? I'm not going to fall for that, It's like, it's a con job. And here I am, 10 years later, on the board of directors of the American Chestnut Foundation, New Hampshire, Vermont chapter. Once I realized what the money was going for, and there was some validity to it, I joined the foundation. Okay, so the talk tonight is about the American chestnut, its history, demise, restoration. Look at those pictures, folks. Isn't that amazing? Early 1900s. Look at the size of those trees. In the 1800s, 1900s, the American chestnut was considered, and it was nicknamed, the redwoods of the East Coast. That was their nickname. Isn't that amazing? Look how big they were. Some of them, could reach a height of 120 feet, and 13 feet in diameter. Monstrous, huge, massive trees. A major part of the forest of the eastern United States. Them and oak trees were the predominant trees found here in the East Coast. They're big trees. So, what happened? Got another interesting story for you. The year's 1904. The director of the Zoological Gardens in New York City, now known as the Bronx Zoo, was very proud about his zoo. He had animals from all over the world. And he had some of the biggest trees in New York were in his park. He was also very proud of those trees. American chestnut trees. They were massive. Across the street from him was the New York Botanical Gardens, which has trees from all over the world, including the American chestnut tree and a recently arrived Asian chestnut tree. Now, in 1904, there was a recently developed, actually it was 1862, the Department of Agriculture was established here in the United States. They didn't have federal guidelines for quarantine. I think you all know where this is going at that time. That wasn't established until 1912. So here's this Asian chestnut tree in the botanical garden, because that person who was running that botanical garden wanted trees from all over the world, and he heard about these Asian chestnut trees, and he was able to get some over into his facility. So in 1904, the director of the zoological gardens there noticed that the American chestnut tree branches were starting to die. He said, well, just no problem, just cut them off. And he would cut off the dead branches, and pretty soon more and more of the branches were dying, and it seemed to be spreading. That's where it all started. It was right there, at the zoological gardens in 1904. And since then, and after that, it started to spread like wildfire across the country. It wasn't until later that they figured out it was this Japanese tree that when it was brought over, it carried on a fungus, which didn't affect the Asian chestnut trees because they had evolved with this fungus over thousands of years. Asian chestnuts grow fine with the fungus, but the American chestnut tree wasn't ready for this new type of fungus, and that's what started the issue. They realized shortly afterwards, after realizing that, hey, this chestnut tree from Asia, it's not getting the disease. So when they started to realize the connection between the fungus and the tree, the original trees from Asia. So that's where it really started. Okay. This is, American chestnut is not a horse chestnut. 2012, when I first started growing the chestnuts at Pine Hill Park with the students, I had one of the parks people come up to me and said, Tom, I have a chestnut tree it's in my dad's property. At that point, I realized how rare that was. I said, oh my gosh, please, can you bring me a burr? It was in the fall time when the burrs, and I'll explain burrs to you in just because they kind of like carry the seeds in a few minutes. She said, I have a burr, I have the seeds. I said, well, could you bring it to me? And she brought it to me, and she's all excited. And then she shows me what she had. It's up on the top right there. I looked at it and said, oh, it is a chestnut, but it's a horse chestnut. Totally, completely different tree. And it was like, oh, my heart sank. And by the way, the horse chestnut you can't eat the seeds. You'll get very sick if you do. But we do have horse chestnuts around this area. But a horse chestnut and American chestnut are not the same thing. They're two completely different trees. This is the American chestnut. This is the tree that you see on the left is very similar in size to the two that have been discovered at Pine Hill Park. Very similar to that. There's probably more at that park. I've been visiting that park pretty much every week for the last 11 years, seriously. And I've looked all over, so 2 is all that's been found so far, but there's probably more. But this is the American chestnut. If I could get a drone over the forest in the springtime, I'd probably see the white flowers that you see on the top right there. Those little green things are female flowers. The little white catkins are the male flowers. The leaves think of them as a canoe, and I always like to look at the edges of the American chestnut tree and think of ocean waves. They look a lot like ocean waves, but that's the American chestnut tree. So here's the male flowers, which if I could, like I said, if I could get a drone out in the springtime, we could probably see these white flowers. And here are the burrs that contain 2 or 3 nuts. And those burrs, I'll be honest with you folks, I don't know how this guy is holding them in his hand because those are very sharp spikes and there's a lot of them. And it hurts to hold these things in your hand. I learned that very quickly. And after handling one burr, after that, I've always held them with a glove. It hurts. It really does. Big golf, tennis ball size stretchers. Here we go. It's what they look like with the seeds, even containing 2 or 3 seeds. Last year was the first time in the history of Vermont school children were able to successfully take care of these trees to the point in the back of the school where they produced fertile seeds. I tried to get WCAX. I tried to get our local newspaper. No one came. On the day that we brought them into the classroom and opened them up, but I took pictures. I took pictures. Isn't that something? There they are. We were really hoping. I was hoping so much to see them this year, and sure enough, early spring, I looked at the trees, and the male catkins were just starting to come out. And I go, yes, this year we're gonna get a bunch of trees. Last year was only 2 trees, and I personally took the pollen off of one tree and put it on the female flowers of the others just to make sure. And we only had 2 trees out of the 20 that were mature enough. And this year, most of them reached that point. And I was so excited. And then the frost. Remember that? And followed by the rain. So I'll show you some horrible pictures in a few minutes. But those are our seeds. Historically, you can see it was an East Coast tree. Look at Vermont. Anybody want to guess why it goes up on the left side and the right side of Vermont? What's on the left side and the right side of Vermont? Connecticut River and Lake Champlain. There you go. It goes up. And there's a little bit, right about where you see the letter V, it's an area right there where there were some. My understanding is that there were some historically over in the West Rutland area, right over there. But now we haven't been Rutland because someone's been planting them for 11 years. We have a lot of them. So, all right. And of course, White Mountain National Forest, they did really well over there in the White Mountains. Historically. What were the cultural, economic benefits? Justin, you had mentioned that they grow really fast. They are fast growing. They are a very fast growing tree. And they get, you can see an enormous size. The 2 up at Pine Hill Park are around 70 feet tall. I have a little device called a clinometer that I can look through and it tells me what the height of the tree is. I have a special type of tape that tells me what the diameter is. So we have fast-growing, rot-resistant. On that first time that I took the electric tram, learning how to speak to the public about the history of the Patuxent National Wildlife Refuge, we made one stop. One of the stops was this dead tree. It was a telegraph pole, old telegraph pole from the 1860s. And the driver said, well, folks, when you're looking at this pole now, you're looking at the pole which sent, it was a telegraph pole, and on that telegraph pole was sent the message that President Lincoln had been assassinated. And that line goes all the way up to Boston, New York City. That's the pole that carried the message. And I'm looking at this pole and I'm thinking, that thing's been here for over 100 years. And I really appreciate the fact that when I hear that it's rot resistant, it's rot resistant. And it was sitting in a swamp, wet soil for over 100 years. And the thing looks like, I mean, it's dead, but I mean, it looks like one of the telephone poles that you see out here. It just amazed me. And of course, it was a major food source for the Appalachian region. The Native American Indians use it for a number of different things. Their boats, their houses were made of chestnut because it's rot resistant. And of course, buildings, farms, fence posts, telephone poles, and tannin. You get the tannin from which they used to make leather, and all sorts of furniture, refrigerators, chairs, and of course horse harnesses, and food. The production of American chestnuts was so great that hundreds and hundreds of carloads, train car loads of these nuts would be transported down to Boston, New York City for distribution for people. Isn't that amazing? Wow, there's a lot of nuts are being produced. And of course, they use the food to feed their cows and other type of animals they'd have on the farm. Wildlife, all sorts of wildlife eat the chestnuts. And all of them, all those benefits are now gone. Okay? And that was that blight that was brought over from Asia in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Okay? It was first identified in New York in 1904 and spread like wildfire. The 50 trees at Pine Hill Park, they're just now, not all of them. There's one, the last year, I saw the first signs of the blight. I knew it was going to happen. I mean, there's not a single American chestnut tree in the United States, not a single wild American chestnut tree that isn't infected with the blight. You won't find any. I guess I was dreaming. I think maybe if it's far enough north, yes, I don't know. So the blight's now started with those trees. And the little red growth here on the trunk is the telltale sign that the tree has been infected. So that means all the other ones will eventually. But those trees that we planted at Pine Hill Park and the trees that are planted in every single school here in Rutland, all of them, they all come from what they call champion trees, big, giant American chestnut trees that have survived for a long time. So very likely that the trees all around this area will survive to grow to a very tall height and produce burrs and produce some seeds. Okay? But eventually, the tree, as they all do, eventually it will die, or they will die. Okay? So the start in 1904, and you can see as years go by, it got worse and worse, spread over greater and greater territory as the years went by. And finally, in 1950, it reached as far south as it could, where those furthest southern growing trees were found. So it took almost 50 years, but that covered the whole region. Okay. So what did they do? Well, first of all, they said, well, it's spreading. Let's do some tree series. Let's cut off a limb, cut off a branch or something. And they found that very quickly that was doing nothing. Let's spray fungicide. Think about this, folks. There was about 4 to 5 billion in the 1800s, early 1900s, 4 to 5 billion American chestnut trees. So how are you going to spray? How are you going to spray that many trees with fungicide? So practically, it was not working. It did not work. So they couldn't do that. Oh, we'll make barriers. The tree's starting in New York, so let's go out about 25 miles and and cut down all the American chestnut trees in a circle around this area and act as a barrier. Well, a spore, a fungal spore, it gets caught up in the wind, can travel literally hundreds of miles. So that was not infected. Well, let's just get rid of the infected trees as quick as we can. Cut them down. Cut them down. That's where foresters think that the biggest mistake was made. Because when they started cutting down all these trees, they cut down the trees that weren't infected also. They just clear cut them down. They may very well have killed some trees that were naturally immune. By cutting them, all these down, they lost that opportunity. Crossbreeding. Well, let's take an American chestnut and crossbreed it with a Chinese chestnut tree. Let's say I do that tomorrow. Let's say I take an American chestnut tree and put some, take a pollen from it and put it on the Chinese chestnut tree. And okay, so we're gonna have to wait 5 years or 6 years for this to grow up to produce seeds, and then let's take those seeds and plant it another 4 or 5 years. It takes a long time to do that. They have been doing that now for a number of decades. We'll talk to you a little bit more in detail about that, but it is being tried. It's one of the methods that they're trying to bring back the American chestnut. The Chinese chestnut, well, why not just grow Chinese chestnuts? Fine. Some people do that. There are Chinese chestnuts in Vermont. Some people are growing. But taste the Chinese chestnut and taste an American chestnut, and you'll see why the Chinese chestnut isn't a very popular tree in the United States. They don't have that sweet taste to them. I've tasted Chinese chestnuts from Price Chopper, and honestly, I've thought of them, they're not kind of bland, my own opinion. I've tasted an American chestnut seed, and it's a sweet nut. It tastes really good. So that's one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of Chinese chestnuts around. It doesn't grow to a real big tree. It's kind of like a big, gigantic shrub rather than a big, tall, majestic tree. So it just hasn't caught on, and it's not doing well here in the United States. Okay, so the American Chestnut Foundation, where did it all start? Well, Dr. Charles Burnham was a geneticist at Minnesota. He was doing the back crossing. He would take an American tree and an Asian tree, a Chinese chestnut, cross them and get the offspring, and then do it again and again and again, trying to get an American chestnut tree that had taken on some of that natural resistance, but has the American characteristics. And then Philip Rutter in 1981, he began something totally different. He says, well, this back cross breeding doesn't seem to be doing it, but I have a better idea. And it's kind of interesting what he did, okay? So the American Chestnut Foundation is undergoing 3 different directions in trying to bring back the American chestnut tree. And one of them is doing really well, okay? First of all, the biological control. Biological control is this. The American chestnut disease was spreading like crazy in the 1950s, but scientists realized early on that European chestnuts, and there's 7 different kinds of chestnuts on the planet Earth, the ones in Europe were infected, but they weren't doing too bad. They'd get a canker, and it seemed to take care of itself, and the tree would grow to a pretty good size. And, the scientists realized, they're doing some study, of that fungus that was causing the European tree to get infected, that the fungus was infected itself by a virus. So the American scientists said, why don't we see if we can infect the funguses here in the United States with a virus and see if that helps control the spread. And it has some success, but we go back to the problem that they had way back in the early 1900s. If you're going to do that, put a virus into the fungus, you're going to have to go to every single tree. And who's going to have the time and the money to do that? So what they're working on now is trying to figure out a way to quickly get the virus into the fungus that's causing the problem. Because it seems to work, but it's just the problem is getting that out there quickly and with a reasonable amount of time and money. So there is some success there. Back-cross breeding, they've been doing it for a number of years. And the bottom line is this. They're not having the results that they expected as of today. They've been doing it for decades. And they get a tree that they consider mostly American chestnut. It has a little bit of the Chinese chestnut in it. That part that they think has the ability to kill the fungus, but it's not working. They now realize that it's not simple genetics. It's very complex genetics involved here. So it's more difficult than they thought it would be, but they're not giving up on it. They're still doing that. The third method is biotechnology. And that's pretty cool. Let me explain this. The hypervirulence, again, they infected the fungus with a virus, and it seems to work. You can also, and I tried this up at one of the trees at the Pine Hill Park, and it worked. You can also take, well, let me back up a little bit. When an American chestnut tree gets infected and starts to die and reaches a point where it's considered a dead tree, it's not completely dead. The roots are still alive. And from those roots will grow tiny little American chestnut trees right from the roots. Why do the roots survive? The roots survive because the microorganisms that are in the soil can kill that fungus from Asia. So why not, if you see the infection start, why not take some mud from the soil right around the tree and pack it on that red area that has the fungus and see if that kills the fungus? And it does, it works. But once again, if you're going to do this, you're going to have to do this for every single tree. And it's almost impractical to do that. So that's the biological control. And of course, the back-cross breeding, they've been doing it for decades, combining American and Asian trees. They've done it for a number of generations. We've been, at this point, we're up at this, what is called B3, F3 tree, which I am so sorry to tell you. The good news is we have some B3, F3 trees back here. The bad news, I don't know which ones they are because the person that gave me these, and I'm not going to mention the person's name because I don't want to get in trouble. When they put the labels on, you can see them right there on those black containers. They didn't realize if you're going to put ink on those labels and you're going to put it out in the sun and the rain, after a couple of weeks, it's probably going to be washed away. So one of those, there's 9 B3, F3 trees back there someplace, which are 15 out of 16 percent American chestnut, mostly American chestnut trees. But again, they don't have the vigor, they don't grow as well, so they're still working on this back crossing. They're trying to figure out what the problem is. And scientists who are working on this truly believe that they can figure this out and get a blight-resistant tree eventually. Okay? So they're not giving up on it. Okay. And here's the orchard down in Virginia where they're doing just that. There's a number of 4 or 5 big farms where they're growing American chestnut trees back with these back crossing. These chapters that you see here are all involved some way with working with back cross trees or other types of American chestnut trees. And how do they get the pollen from one tree to another tree, an American chestnut to a Chinese? They do this controlled pollination. They're doing this. This is type of things that we do here in Vermont and New Hampshire. They'll actually go take the pollen from one tree, put it on the female flower of another tree, then cover that up so that it's not pollinated by some other type of American chestnut tree, and cover them up with bags that are squirrel-proof. So a lot of work and time goes into collecting the seeds. A lot of work and time. And every year they send me a whole bunch of these seeds to grow and then pass them out to schools and people that might be interested in starting their own orchards. And these are my leftovers, by the way, that you have at the table. I have at the end of the season. Okay. So there's a lot of work goes into getting these seeds that you see here. Okay. And people have what they call chestnut orchards. We have a 20 tree orchard behind Mount St. Joseph's. There's a 50 tree at Pine Hill Park. There's a 60 tree test orchard at the Allen Street School across from the hospital. And every single school in Rutland has trees. And at this point, I've taken it upon myself to try to get American chestnut trees into every single school in Vermont. So I'm up to almost 60 right now, 60 schools. A few in New Hampshire. When I was doing Bradford, Vermont, and Fairleigh, Vermont, schools across the river said, "Hey, how come they're getting them and we're not?" Okay, I'll bring over to some New Hampshire. So some of the New Hampshire schools have them too. So, all right. Recent finding: back cross breeding is more complicated than originally thought. It may require a different approach. They're not sure. But now biotechnology, transgenic. This is the one that the 60 tree experimental orchard at Allen Street School is involved with. Scientists have known for many, many years that there are a number of different plants in the middle of the United States, especially this wheat plant, that's immune to fungus infection. So a scientist thought, well, why is that the case? Let's look at their DNA. And they were actually able to determine what gene on the wheat plant DNA protects that plant from a fungus infection. So scientists from the State University of New York, Environmental Science and Forestry campus said, what if we take that gene from the wheat plant and put it into the DNA of the American chestnut? Then we should have a tree that is immune to the fungus. So they've been working on that since 1990. Okay. Preliminary results have been very, very positive. This is basically, they identify the gene, over on the left, top left there in the wheat plant. They take it out, cut it out, put it into a bacteria, which then transfers that DNA into a embryo, an American chestnut embryo on a petri dish. That's how it works, okay? Wow, can you imagine the technology that's gone into this? The basic research that was required to figure that out. Did it work? Wow, look at this picture, folks. There's the wild American chestnut on the left. The Darling 54 American chestnut in the middle looks great. And then the Chinese chestnut, which again doesn't grow as well here in the United States, but it survived the infection. But look at that American chestnut, Darling 54. They were able to successfully do that. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing, you guys? So when they did that, they ended up with American chestnut trees that were 99.999% American chestnut. It has those two genes. Are they genetically modified? Yes. I'm not going to lie to you. You know, it's funny how I talked to some of the people on the foundation. I said, well, you know, people have a difficult time with GMOs, and he said, yeah, no, I know, Tom, but it's just, and I said, no. You need to be straight with people. It's a GMO, but you know, the American chestnut has thousands and thousands of genes, so we put one more gene into it. You know, is it really that much different? And folks, what plants at Price Chopper or Hannaford in their vegetables are not GMOs? Which ones have not been changed over the centuries from genetic modifications in one way or the other? So, and to explain this a little bit more, the gene produces, it's called oxalate oxidate, OXO, okay? And that oxalate oxidate is found in a lot of different types of food. Nothing special about that gene, okay? But with the American chestnut, the oxalate oxidate does this. A fungus produces oxalic acid. It's that acid that kills the American chestnut. If you have a gene that produces oxalate oxidate, which will destroy that oxalate acid, well, you should have a plant that's going to do just fine. It turns that oxalate acid into H2O2, which is hydrogen peroxide, and carbon dioxide. And the plant gets rid of that through respiration, and we now have a way through a genetic modification of producing a blight-resistant tree. And it seems to be very successful. By the way, it's under, of course, it's got to go under a lot of review, and it's been doing that for years. Scientists say, well, the leaves that are produced by this tree, are they going to be a problem? So they're doing all sorts of experiments. One I think is the cutest one is this. The leaves of this transgenic American tree falls to the ground, goes into a stream, and tadpoles are going to feed on those dead leaves, which they do. Well, let's do an experiment. Let's put in these tadpoles and these transgenic leaves and use a control with regular American chestnut trees and see what happens. And the tadpoles that were feeding on the transgenic tree grew a lot bigger than a normal American chestnut tree. So that didn't seem to be a problem. They did all sorts of chemistry to make sure that the nuts, the transgenic nuts, are going to be safe for people to eat. And everything is fine. There's absolutely no difference as far as nutritional value or any poisons or anything like that. That doesn't exist. They've studied, well, what's going to happen to the bees that pollinate them? Are they going to be affected? No, the bees, the insects that feed them are just fine. So they've done all these tests over many, many years, and it's been determined that the transgenic tree is a very safe tree. It's not going to be a problem. Now, the foundation thought that this summer, the EPA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, would finally give the okay to release these thousands of transgenic American chestnut trees that are now in New York and some in Maine, Virginia, finally give the okay to release them. Okay. They're clones. And that's a problem because you need two different American chestnut trees, two different trees to get viable nuts. It's called a dioecious tree. And there are a number of different kinds of dioecious trees, trees that can't fertilize themselves. They need to be fertilized by another tree. When you leave tonight, if you want viable nuts, you're going to have to take at least 2 trees with you. Okay, at least 2. So, where was I going with this? Oh, so now we thought that they would give the okay. One of the reasons I've been going around schools, having schools planting trees, is because I wanted them to be ready for when the time comes for these transgenic trees to come out into the public. Their schools will have trees that are already this tall, and maybe next year, very likely next year, they'll start to produce flowers. And when the EPA says, yes, it's okay, we'll get some of those trees, plant them right next to those trees, and those students will be able to get, schools will be able to get viable nuts, half of which will be blight resistant. So right now there's 60 trees at Allen Street School. We're another reason of putting these trees all out there is that we're preserving the DNA of these wild American chestnut trees before they die. Okay? So we're getting them out, we're growing them. There's 60 of them at Allen Street School. Some of them from the Allen Street School some of the trees are from Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, a number of different places. And so all the trees are in the schools around here. They're all from different locations, all getting ready for the time when the trees that are transgenic will be okayed to be brought out into the public. So let's see what else we had in. All right, so that's what's happening right now. By the way, if you find a nut-producing American chestnut tree, the foundation wants to know about it. And then they're going to send someone out. If it's in this area, it'll probably be me. I'll go out and I will collect a sample of the tree and then send it to Kendra Collins, who will then determine whether it's a wild American chestnut or if it's a hybrid. It might be a tree that's part Asian Chinese chestnut, might be a purebred, I don't know. So, but if you find one, you can always send a leaf sample here. And the website, if you go to the American Chestnut Foundation website, it has all this information for you. If you forget about that, you don't know what to do, go to Randall, send the lease, and Randall knows how to get a hold of me and says, Tom, so-and-so has the lease. And so you can do that. Let's see what I have here. Okay, become a TACF member if you like. You can give out gift memberships. You can volunteer. So I started out as a volunteer, and these contacts I'll just pass with you. But Evan Fox is the president of the Vermont, New Hampshire Foundation, and Kendra Collins is a scientist for Vermont, New Hampshire. She's up at UVM. I have my contact information. If you're interested, I'm going to give you a sheet of paper. If you take trees, the sheet of paper has the directions on how to grow your trees and my contact information. So if you are interested, I can help you out directly. Okay, this is me standing by one of the trees at Pine Hill Park. Look at the size of that. Nice size. 70-foot tall American chestnut. One of them, I found 2 of them. One of them was doing great. They're both infected. but they're both producing, well, they were both producing burrs. And then last year, 2 years ago, we had do you remember the spongy moth, formerly known as the gypsy moth, the spongy moth infestation? Wow, the Vermont forest, took a beating. They completely defoliated one of the American chestnut trees at Pine Hill Park. That was last year, and this year, the leaves never came back. But little shoots are coming out the side of the tree. It's like, good. Okay. The other tree wasn't touched, and the floor's covered with these burrs. So, yes, there are wild American chestnut trees here in Rutland County, folks. They really are. That's me climbing up this ladder. 72 years old, climbing up the ladder in the forest. Getting yelled at by my daughter, don't ever do that again. Holding a 10-foot pole, cutting off these limbs so I can get leaves to send to Kendra Collins. The students around the city are now planting trees, chestnut trees on their school grounds or at Pine Hill Park. Those 50 trees are cared for by the 8th grade students at Christ the King School. That's a couple of them right there. But they planted that tree last year. During the summertime, I'm sent seeds, usually around 100 seeds. I have that big south-facing window. There's one of the young students there, Ava, who's watering all the little baby American chestnut trees. By the end of the summer, they're the size of what you see right back there. Okay, so this is Northwest Elementary School. There's 3 doing very well. Those trees they'll flower probably in 2025, I'm guessing. I visit the schools. I give presentations. This is the Woodstock High School. This is the horticultural class. So they started growing American chestnut trees on their school. And it's me giving a talk to students in Bridgewater. So I'm all over the place. I'll go any place in Vermont to give a talk. Here's the 20 trees behind Mount St. Joseph School. You can see the very center, there's a really big tall one. There's another one off to the left. Those 2 trees flowered last year. First time students were able to grow trees to the point where they flowered and they got burrs filled with viable nuts. Oh, sorry, I went backwards here. This year, remember the flooding we had? A drainage was blocked. Someone goofed just outside the school, and all backed up. And it wiped out 15 of the 20 trees. And about, I don't know, most of them, all of them were going to be flowering this year, and it was just crushed my heart. Because this, I consider, the one behind MSJ, this was not the 60 tree up at Out Street School, but this one I considered the flagship because it was the first one to produce the nuts, and this one was going to be the big nut producer. But this 15 out of 20. So what I did, you notice that there's green behind the flooding area up by the wall there? So guess what I planted up near the wall? I planted 5 more. So we have now 10 viable trees. Hopefully that they'll flower next year. Here's the 5 I planted right by the fence, away from the highest point of flooding. So I think they're going to be just fine. Here's the burrs from last year at Mount St. Joseph's. The students, the advanced biology students were taking care of the trees. And by the way, every time the student does this, they get community service hours. And you know, if you're going to graduate from Rutland High School or MSJ here in Rutland, you have to have those. If any school, if you're going to graduate from any school in Vermont, you have to have community service hours. So the kids enjoy doing it. We took them into the lab, opened up the burrs, noticed the gloves, and got the seeds. So that's where we're at right now with the American chestnut. It's show the transgenic tree is showing a lot of success. The feeling is that it's going to pass EPA inspection and all within a few months. It shouldn't be. There has been no problems, No signs that it'll be a problem tree at all. So we're hoping for that passing. As soon as it does, they're going to hit. There's 10,000 transgenic American chestnut trees already producing pollen that are ready to be passed out. And that's great because the schools here, at least in Rutland, and 50 some other schools in Vermont, they have their trees that are already growing. They'll be ready, and we'll have a lot of American chestnut trees growing here in Vermont in another year or so. We're at the northernmost range. They don't grow much farther than where we are right now, folks. So I'm surprised they're doing as well as they are. And in fact, there's scientists that are wondering, why are these trees in Rutland doing so well? And some scientists are thinking, geez, climate change. It's like, wow, it's really here. We're getting American chestnut trees growing all over Vermont, and that was not historically the case. So